This is the story of an extraordinary trip I took in July 2015 with my partner Carol Rietzma. Carol, a retired biology professor at SUNY New Paltz, has taught courses on endangered species and had long dreamed of seeing these animals in the wild. On our frequent visits to zoos in New York City and elsewhere, we had talked about how great it would be to someday experience these creatures in their natural habitat. When I turned 70, it seemed obvious that our someday would best be sooner rather than later. 2015 would be the year for our African safari. We chose a group trip from Go Ahead Tours, which we had previously used for travel to Europe, Asia, and Central America. Go Ahead offers what seemed like an optimal 10-day Kenya wildlife safari, to which we added a 4-day extension to visit Serengeti and several other renowned national parks. What we had previously visited in Africa was limited to the northern part of the continent, Morocco, Tunisia, and Algeria. This was to be our first, and probably last, visit to the heart of the continent, south of the Sahara Desert along the equator. After setting the date and booking our reservations in mid-2014, we had about a year to prepare for our big trip. Unlike our other trips, we were not allowed to bring any suitcases. Our luggage was limited to a single duffel bag per person, since we would be spending 2 weeks traveling in a 4x4 Land Cruiser. Other preparations included doctor visits, vaccinations, and pills against malaria, hepatitis, tetanus, polio, typhoid, and yellow fever. Most of this was probably overkill and quite unnecessary from a practical health standpoint. July is wintertime in East Africa, dry with very mild temperatures that rarely climb above the 70s. We hardly encountered any mosquitoes or other disease-bearing insects. I packed ample supplies of insect repellent and sunblock that went largely unused. I probably would not have undertaken this trip if it weren't for my partner Carol. While an African safari was somewhere on my bucket list, it certainly wasn't anywhere near the top. A few years ago, I had been on a game drive in India that was limited to a single day. That was a nice experience during which I saw a lot of wildlife, including monkeys, crocodiles, and a tired old tiger. But was this something I wanted to do every day for 2 weeks? Wouldn't it get boring not exploring cities, just looking at animals for so many days on end? Would I be able to experience any of the people and their culture in Africa? Our flight from JFK to Dubai lasted some 13 hours. After a 3-hour layover in the Dubai airport, which doubles as a huge upscale shopping mall, we flew another 4 hours to Nairobi, the bustling Kenyan capital. There we were met by James, who would be our expert tour guide and trusted driver for the entire Kenyan portion of our trip. James drove us to the Boma, a large modern hotel on the western edge of Nairobi, to which we would return 2 more times in the course of the next several weeks. The Boma is in a relatively safe part of town, far from the teeming slums and shantytown areas where so many of the city's nearly 4 million inhabitants live. The hotel served sumptuous buffet meals and generally had a level of spacious comfort that compares favorably with the best hotels anywhere. Although we were aware that Kenya and its capital had been experiencing occasional terrorist attacks, I was not expecting a hotel to be a walled compound protected by armed guards. Kenya has suffered a string of attacks by the Somalia-based Al-Shabaab militant group, but most of the country is not like other places where such attacks are commonplace. Still, many hotels, shopping malls, and private enterprises are walled and protected by armed guards, as are public buildings such as schools, hospitals, and government offices. Photographing any policemen or soldiers is strictly prohibited. Our presence in Nairobi coincided with that of U.S. President Barack Obama, the first ever visit to Kenya by a sitting American president. Obama's father was from Kenya, and expectations were sky high that the visit from the country's favorite son could miraculously usher in a new era of prosperity for the entire nation. The country's leading newspapers devoted special issues to the visiting dignitary, whose visit temporarily brought weekend traffic in the capital to a near standstill. Before the end of the day, I realized that there were actually two separate and distinct Kenyas. The Kenya for mostly poor black Kenyans, and the Kenya for mostly well-heeled, mostly white or Asian tourists. Unlike the dozens of other countries that I had visited over the past 7 decades, we would not get to know Kenya and its people by freely exploring its city streets or plazas, its many diverse shops, restaurants, or bars frequented by locals. For the entire trip, we would remain in our sealed tourist bubble, a safe cocoon from which one could only catch fleeting glimpses of the real Kenya for Kenyans. Guides functioned as the mediators between these two distinct Kenyas. They have different names for their separate roles in the two different Kenyas. One was Muamji, whom we called James. Manyonu was called Jeff. Other guides who worked with our group were Eutychus and Freddie, but I don't recall what their real Kenyan names were. Even though they had never been out of East Africa, our guides belonged to the small Kenyan middle class, well-educated, multilingual, and comfortable interacting with visitors from other countries. After a good night's sleep, we had a detailed orientation session and met the other safari participants. 16 Americans from all sections of the country would be divided into 3 groups, which would remain together for the entire trip. Each group would have its own guide to drive its own rugged safari vehicle, a version of the popular 8-seat Toyota Land Cruiser. At the orientation, we received a hat, a blanket, and reading materials from Vintage Africa, Go Ahead's local partner. Then it was off to the elephant orphanage operated by the David Sheldrick Wildlife Trust. The elephant nursery is nestled within Nairobi National Park. It is still overseen by Daphne Sheldrick, whose elephant experiences span a lifetime. She spent nearly 3 decades of trial and error to perfect the milk formula and complex husbandry necessary to rear an orphaned infant elephant. The trust has saved over 150 orphaned infant calves. Some had fallen into wells, while others were orphaned by poachers who killed their mothers for their ivory tusks. The illegal trafficking of ivory is a huge multi-billion-dollar growth business. It is fueled by widespread poverty in Africa, weak or corrupt law enforcement, and a booming Chinese middle class, whose insatiable craving for ivory results in the slaughter of some 30,000 African elephants every year. In the last 5 years, Africa has lost 60% of its elephant population, a trend that shows no signs of slowing down. Militias and terrorist groups are now funded in part by the lucrative ivory trade, which could well result in the extinction of elephants during our lifetime. While at the nursery, these animals are entirely dependent upon milk formula and a team of trained keepers who spend years caring for them until they can be reintroduced into the wild by the age of 10. The trust receives funds from both public and private sources, including a program where individuals can adopt or foster a baby elephant. That's not without some irony in this poor country, where over 40% of the population is unemployed and an even greater number is subsisting below the poverty level. Instead of disappearing, this feeling of irony is actually intensified at our next stop, the Giraffe Center outside of Nairobi. Here, for a hefty entrance fee, visitors, all of whom were foreign tourists, could get up close and feed these striking animals little food pellets. Irony turned to alienation as I watched people of all ages actually kissing the giraffes and allowing the animals with their 8-inch tongues to deftly snatch the food pellets from people's lips. On the afternoon of our first full day in Nairobi, we visited the former home of the Danish author Karen Blixen. She is best known for a book of memoirs titled Out of Africa, which describes the 17 years that she lived outside of Nairobi and ran a coffee plantation. Born Karen Dinison in 1885, she married the wealthy Baron Blixen and moved to what was then British East Africa, while still in her 20s. During the Great Depression, Karen Blixen was forced to sell the plantation. She resumed her writing career and returned to Denmark, where she lived until her death in 1962. Her life and loves in Kenya were made into the Academy Award-winning film of the same title by Sidney Pollack in 1985, starring Meryl Streep as Karen and Robert Redford as her lover, Finch Hatton. Her former home next to the 6,000-acre coffee plantation is now a fine museum, surrounded by some of the old farm implements used on her plantation. The day's final activity consisted of a brief and rather superficial tour of Nairobi. The only stop we made was at the edge of a park overlooking the city. The park was said to be popular among the city residents, but it seemed quite empty compared to New York Central Park on a balmy summer afternoon. The dilapidated condition of the few benches and signs was quite striking. July is a winter month in Kenya and ideal for a safari. The weather is mainly dry and temperatures rarely rise above the 70s. It did rain briefly on several occasions, which helped reduce the amount of dust generated on unpaved roads. We spent the first part of our third day driving through the Rift Valley and then climbing up into the Aberdares, Kenya's third highest mountain range, located 60 miles north of Nairobi. Rainforests alternate with bamboo forests and moorland. Here we saw a number of animals in the wild for the first time: waterbuck, giant forest hog, Cape buffalo, baboon, black and white colobus monkeys. We spent the night in a lodge built in the shape of Noah's Ark. The Ark has 4 viewing areas from which to observe the ever-present animal activity. At the nearby waterhole and salt lick, we saw a parade of animals, especially Cape buffalo and elephants. We stayed up late that night, mesmerized by these huge beasts and their offspring. Entire elephant herds regularly trek for miles to feast on this salt lick. It gets quite cold at night as temperatures plummet, and we were glad to be provided with hot water bottles to keep us warm in bed. In a nature walk next to the Ark, we saw the first of the many hundreds of bird species that are indigenous to Africa. Carol, an avid birder, was in her element. Even though every day brought new and different adventures, by day 4 a certain routine had been established. I would wake up at about 5 a.m. every morning without the aid of an alarm clock, shower, enjoy a large breakfast, and be ready to head out by 7 o'clock. A 5-hour drive from the Ark took us to the Kigio Wildlife Conservancy. This 3,500-acre area was originally owned by a colonial settler family who decided to give up cattle ranching in favor of wildlife conservation. The area contains thousands of zebra, buffalo, gazelle, impala, eland, and waterbuck, in addition to over 200 bird species. A local naturalist took us on a walk through the hills covered by short grass and scuffy shrub. He spent most of the time picking up and discussing a wide variety of animal droppings, but I was more impressed by the stunning views of the surrounding mountains. We spent 2 nights at the Kigio Wildlife Camp overlooking the Malewa River. The camp is constructed in an environmentally friendly way from sustainable pine wood, canvas panels, and traditional thatch provided by the surrounding community. Hot water and electricity was available only during a limited part of the day and night, a conservation measure we appreciated and would encounter at other accommodations during the trip. One of the keys to a successful safari is careful planning and organization. Many hours are spent traveling from one region or national park to another. Planning must include providing delicious meals and clean, appropriately spaced rest stops. You also need variety so that every day's experiences are fresh and provide something new. Ideally, every day should be better, more beautiful, more intense and exciting than the previous ones. I was amazed at how our safari succeeded in this regard, gradually building from one day to the next. Most of our fifth day was spent on game drives through Lake Nakuru National Park. Early in the day, we came across a frightened little lion cub hidden in a ditch while its mother was off hunting. It's estimated that only about half of all the animals in the wild survive to maturity. This includes predators like lions, whose cubs are often eaten by other animals, sometimes the same species. On our fifth day, we saw a profusion of animals, many zebra, impala, dik-dik, and baboons. Down by Lake Nakuru, we found a profusion of flamingos, along with others such as Manakwa dove, Kenya's national bird, the crowned crane, and a variety of waterfowl such as Egyptian geese and huge marabou storks with 9-foot wingspans. We also saw our first group of rhinoceros, though at a considerable distance. There are twice as many female impalas as males. Females and their young form herds of up to 100 individuals, while males, with their beautiful horns, live in smaller bachelor groupings. These female ostriches belong to the largest living bird species. While they can't fly, they can strut beautifully and can run faster than 40 miles an hour. As the tallest terrestrial animals, giraffes with their long necks and legs are truly imposing. Leaves from tall acacia trees are their main food source, though we also saw them browsing smaller shrubs. Later in the day, we heard a talk about the history of the Kigio wildlife camp. The conservancy works closely with the local community and supports several enterprises, schools, and an orphanage. Women who make jewelry from recycled paper brought a sample of their work, which they offered for sale to our group. Proceeds go toward community development projects, such as digging wells to provide drinking water. Every year, hundreds of local children are invited to participate in ecotourism workshops, one of many examples of how wildlife tourism plays a crucial role in the development of Kenya's economy. One of the things that made our safari such a great adventure was not knowing exactly what we would be seeing or experiencing from 1 hour or 1 day to the next. Our sixth day began with a visit to Lake Naivasha, which had not been on our itinerary, but what a great surprise it turned out to be. This freshwater lake is only slightly larger than 50 square miles, but it contains over 400 species of birds and a sizable population of hippos and other large animals. The many birds in and around the lake were truly spectacular. Superb starling, great white egret, marabou stork, gray heron, great white pelican, yellow-billed stork, sacred ibis, moorhen, and African fish eagle. At the edge of Lake Naivasha was a profusion of mammals in close proximity to one another. Giraffes, wildebeest, and zebras could be seen grazing side by side. Under a clump of trees, we spotted our first hippos. Later on, we came across another group out in the open water. While they seem like harmless vegetarians, you don't want to get too close to them. Weighing over 3,000 pounds, hippos are the third largest species of land animals after elephants and rhinoceros, and are considered among the most dangerous. The hours spent on beautiful Lake Naivasha passed quickly. We weren't eager to climb back into the vans for the 5-hour drive to Masai Mara. We drove along the floor of the Rift Valley via Narok, a bustling market center. I ignored the warnings repeated throughout the trip not to photograph people without their permission and not to take pictures out the window. In the afternoon, we had our first game drive through the Masai Mara National Reserve. The Mara, as it is commonly called, is the northern tip of the Serengeti ecosystem, which is mostly in Tanzania to the south. After giving birth in February, millions of wildebeest, zebras, gazelles, and the predators annually migrate over 1,000 miles a year. First they graze northward across the Serengeti plain. They spend the dry summer months in Kenya's Mara before heading back south again to Tanzania in one huge clockwise loop. Part of the Great Migration, considered one of the 10 wonders of the world, consists of Thomson's gazelles. They're striking for their tricolor coats and distinctive horns. Wildebeest are the most prevalent large animal in the Mara, and often graze in mixed herds with zebras and other animals. Before and during the pre-breeding season, males will frequently challenge other males in an effort to impress female wildebeest. It's unclear what impact this fellow had on any females, but he clearly impressed me with his display of energy as he bounded from one potential adversary to the next. Later that day, we saw our first pair of cheetahs lying in the tall grass, looking out over grazing animals that might constitute their next meal. Animals spend most of their time eating, drinking, and sleeping, or moving about from one spot to another to find more to eat or drink. Toward the end of the day, we came across a small group of elephants, the first of many that we would encounter in the days ahead. Since we were close to the equator, we typically enjoyed 12 hours of daylight, from about 6 or 7 in the morning to that same time in the evening. Sunsets were often spectacular. We spent most of our 7th day on game drives through the Masai Mara. The first new animals we encountered were a pair of crowned cranes, the national bird of Uganda. These omnivores have a lively breeding display that involves dancing, bowing, and jumping. The ostriches we saw seemed friendly, or at least not afraid of people. As the largest and fastest land birds, they are too heavy to fly, but can run over 40 miles an hour. These ones with the black feathers are males who will fight for a harem of 2 to 7 females. This spotted hyena is wearing a collar that she has been fitted with by researchers for tracking purposes. Though they are popularly thought of as cowardly scavengers, hyenas actually kill most of the animals they eat. The animals we saw the most of were wildebeest, thousands upon thousands of them. While we had missed the peak of the Great Migration earlier in July when they numbered literally in the millions, we did see a seemingly endless line of migrating animals that extended for many miles. James parked the safari truck on a ledge overlooking the Mara River. We waited several minutes before the animals started to stampede toward the steep cliffs above the river. The wildebeest at the front of the line came to a screeching halt at the edge of the cliffs, but the herd kept on coming, and eventually hundreds of them charged down the steep incline. They rushed across the Mara River and scrambled up the steep incline on the other side. There they came to a stop, just milled around and seemed about as confused as we were. We asked James why they were heading in the wrong direction, namely south, where they had originally come from earlier that month. He explained that this was not a reverse migration, merely an example of grass being greener on the other side. A number of crocodiles were quietly sunbathing in the river. When they are hungry enough, they take their toll of the wildebeest population, as do other predators like lions, leopards, and cheetahs. The wildebeest herd annually loses hundreds of thousands of individuals to sheer exhaustion and to large predators who target the weakened stragglers, the very young and the very old. We didn't see any large animals being killed, but we did come across dead animals being eaten, such as this lion feasting on a zebra. We also saw individuals maimed for life after surviving violent encounters, like elephants missing a tusk or a tail. Most of the animals in the wild are quite peaceful. The browsers, such as the giraffes, spend hours eating leaves. Grazers, like Cape buffalo, spend their days munching grass, and the large carnivores spend most of their lives resting or sleeping. Of course, when hunger takes over, the predators will hunt down their prey. We did see one example of striking species solidarity when a large number of wildebeest successfully chased away a cheetah that was threatening the herd. Life is hard for most animals on the Serengeti Plain. Whether grazers, browsers, or carnivores, it is estimated that less than half will reach maturity, which is about what it was for humans before modern medicine. Being up so close to large animals in the wild is both beautiful and exhilarating, a sensation that is impossible to describe and that needs to be experienced. When large animals such as elephants or lions approach the open vehicle in which we are standing, there is a high degree of anticipation and apprehension, since you never know exactly what will happen. These animals have grown up with tourists swarming around them every day of their life. They have always had safari vehicles driving around their habitat all day long, so there's nothing unusual or surprising about that for them. As long as people keep a respectable distance and don't invade the animal's personal space by coming close enough to actually touch them, they will usually do the same and keep a respectful, non-threatening distance from us. Usually. Lions spend much of their time resting for about 20 hours a day. They typically hunt, groom, and socialize at night. While some are solitary and nomadic, most live in residential prides, which are stable social units. The average pride consists of 4, 5, 6 females, their cubs of both sexes, and 1 or 2 adult males. Some pride members may leave, or a nomad may join the pride, though most females will reject any attempt by an unrelated female to join the group. Male cubs reach maturity by age 2, when they are forced to leave the pride to become nomads. Lions and hyenas compete for prey wherever they coexist. They frequently challenge each other and will steal each other's kills, as well as their offspring when left unattended. It is estimated that 90% of cheetah cubs are killed during the first few weeks of life, mostly by lions. Since lions don't have any predators, they have nobody they need to hide from. They can just stretch out and snooze on their backs in plain view of everyone else. These 3 females are acting a lot like affectionate house cats, but you wouldn't want to pet them, would you? Or maybe you would. There are over 30 tribes and languages to be found in Kenya. The Masai Mara National Reserve is named for the Maasai, a tribe that emigrated south from Sudan in the 18th century. For the past 250 years, they have maintained their pastoral way of life in southern Kenya and northern Tanzania. Though they have a reputation for being fierce warriors, their principal pursuit is shepherding mixed herds of goats, sheep, and cows. These herds average about 50 animals and can be seen everywhere, all across the barren countryside, all along highways and country roads, in villages and towns. Shepherding is the job of men and boys who will typically carry a big stick and dress in traditional red outfits. We spend an afternoon visiting a Maasai village, which is typically circular in shape. At night, the animals are kept inside the village or penned just outside the circle for safety. The animals are the Maasai's liquid assets. They are bred and used not just for food and drink, but also as a source of income derived from trading or bartering the animals. Maasai remain remarkably healthy by drinking their animals' fresh milk and blood, while meat is traditionally eaten raw. Today, the Maasai, who for many centuries were pastoral nomads, are having to negotiate cultural interactions and social realities with more modern, predominantly Christian Kenyan majority. The entrepreneurial Maasai who hosted our visit charged us $25 a person to visit their village. Their small, cramped, and smelly huts are made of dried animal dung. The Maasai men performed some traditional dances, one of which involves seeing which dancer could jump the highest. We were then shown inside one of the tiny huts where the Maasai live with their large families. They practice both polygamy and, to a lesser extent, polyandry. While men take care of the animals, women are responsible for their numerous children and for constructing the dwellings. Due to pressures from neighboring populations, the Maasai are gradually becoming less nomadic, and their children are now required to attend Kenyan public schools. At around age 12, both boys and girls undergo very painful circumcision without any anesthesia. After the final dance performances by the village's women, they offered a large display of their colorful handmade jewelry for sale. The extent of these villagers' evident poverty, mixed with the raw intensity of their fervent sales pitches, was discomforting to say the least. Wherever our safari vehicles had to stop for a boarder or to pay admission to a game park, we were immediately surrounded by women selling their handmade jewelry and other products. Extreme inequality has, unfortunately, been a global reality since ancient times. While it may be improving, it certainly will be with us for the foreseeable future. On our final game drive through the Masai Mara, we encountered large herds of elephants. Since elephants are typically socialized in matriarchal herds, most individuals are adult females and their offspring. Elephants trek across the plains on ancient paths from one feeding or watering spot to the next. Like human mothers pushing their toddlers in strollers, elephant moms gently push along their offspring with their trunks. Other animals, such as this male ostrich, are nearby but avoid getting too close to the elephant herd. It is common to see juvenile elephants, like other male teenagers, engaging in playful combat. Sparring with your brother or cousin will develop skills vital to help any adult male elephant survive. The only weapons they possess are their own bodies, which can at times be lethal. This adult female stops, looks straight at us, and scratches the ground. Like a school crossing guard, she's signaling for us to keep our distance and not get any closer to the herd crossing the dirt road in front of us. A cheetah may look like a peaceful cat at best, but it's the fastest land animal, capable of running 75 miles an hour. These two males are just horsing around in zebra fashion. What looks like mating behavior is actually more a display of dominance by two frisky guys. On the road back to Nairobi, one of our vehicles lost its running board, which then needed to be welded back on at the next village. This unscheduled stop provided the welcome opportunity for yet another glimpse at Kenya outside of the tourist cocoon. Then, after dealing with a flat tire, it was back to our tourist bubble in Nairobi. The drive to Amboseli National Park took almost 5 hours. Even when roads are paved, which only the country's major highways are, there is usually only one lane in either direction. The speed limit is typically set at 50 miles an hour. Police checkpoints and speed bumps are a frequent sight, especially when entering or leaving a town. Our road led through many villages where we got a glimpse of more down-to-earth Kenyan life outside the tourist bubble. Rural life in sub-Saharan Africa was fascinating to me, a colorful mixture of varied small-scale commerce, especially with fresh produce. Unfortunately, we never stopped to interact with Kenyans or see them dealing with other Kenyans. Our so-called comfort stops were all in carefully chosen establishments that cater exclusively to safari tourists. To get to the relatively clean restrooms, one has to go through huge gift stores crammed with thousands of wooden statues and other souvenirs. After spending many hours on bumpy, dusty roads, stops of any kind are greatly appreciated. Participants can stretch their legs and reconnect on different levels. The Amboseli National Park is at the southern edge of Kenya, part of the 3,000 square mile ecosystem that extends across the border with Tanzania. As in the Mara, the local people are principally of the Maasai tribe. It's one of the most popular parks in Kenya, with large herds of elephants and sizable numbers of other large mammals. When we arrived at the camp, we were pleased to see that the facility included inexpensive therapeutic massage sessions, which we promptly signed up for. Our accommodations were small but efficient. During the afternoon game drive, we encountered the largest herds of elephants we had seen up to then. Some were positively huge and included a number of adult males, as well as the far more numerous females and their many offspring. Adult bulls mostly interact with family groups when looking for a mate and enter a state known as must. There is no clear understanding yet of must, during which testosterone soars to more than 50 times its normal level. In this state, males tend to be extremely aggressive toward both male and female elephants, as well as toward other animals, including humans. There was considerable excitement caused by a straggling juvenile elephant, who had obviously been otherwise preoccupied as his huge herd had moved on. When it finally noticed that the others were several miles off in the distance, he could be heard trumpeting wildly. It was as if it was screaming, "Hey you guys, wait for me!" as it raced across the plain to catch up with the herd. Another elephant herd with a number of youngsters crossed the road right in front of our van. Despite their enormous size and weight, they are amazingly graceful and highly intelligent creatures, carefully setting down 1 foot at a time. On the way back to the lodge at dusk, I learned just how difficult it is to photograph Mount Kilimanjaro. Its summit is typically invisible due to cloud cover, but we were lucky to see the snow-capped volcanic mountaintop shortly before sunset. We spent all of our 10th safari day on game drives through the Amboseli National Park. Naturally, I was skeptical. How could this day possibly provide what we had not experienced in the previous 9 days? The day began with the more common species, beautifully tricolored Thompson's gazelles, interspersed with ostriches, giraffes, and zebras mingling with herds of wildebeest and elephants. People in our tour would point out how round the zebras' rumps were, how intricately striped their tails are, how their facial striping looked like eyeliner. Some zebras were visibly pregnant with swollen bellies, even as others were nursing their young. The novelty of the day was a host of birds. Many were quite large and colorful. Some of them we were seeing for the very first time or in closer proximity. A Verreaux's owl, the tawny eagle, black-headed heron, the familiar crowned crane, the striking secretary bird, the helmeted guinea fowl, the blacksmith lapwing, the African spoonbill, and the lappet-faced vulture. One of the highlights on this day was getting to observe several cheetahs up close. As they sit or slink through the tall grass, these beautifully adapted creatures represent a striking combination of both power and grace. There are only about 10,000 cheetahs left in 23 African countries, about 1/10 the number that thrived here a century ago. Though their litters typically consist of 6 cubs, their decline is due to loss of habitat, predation by other animals, and contact with humans who kill them for their skins or capture them for the illegal pet trade. Cheetahs are successful hunters, helped not just by their top speed of 75 miles an hour, but also because of their ability to drastically alter direction while traveling at high speed. Baboons offer a different kind of visual entertainment as they pick their way from shrub to shrub. They live in troops with up to several hundred individuals. Their offspring are especially cute and so much more agile than their human counterparts. Young animals are weaned after about a year. They reach maturity in 5 to 8 years. Males leave their birth group at maturity, whereas females stay in the group their entire lives. The many swamps enable elephants to cool off while standing knee-deep in their own salad bowls. Africa's highest mountain was originally part of British East Africa, which later became Kenya. There is a popular myth that Queen Victoria gave Kilimanjaro as a wedding present to her grandson, William II, who would later become German Kaiser. While this legend appears as actual history in some guidebooks, it is pure fabrication. Local chieftains from the Chaga tribe yielded the territory to German East Africa in 1886. Following a spectacular sunset, we returned to the camp and had a beautiful farewell dinner, saying goodbye to those in the group who would not be going on to Tanzania. Most of the day was spent driving to the southern Kenyan border and then crossing over into northern Tanzania, before proceeding to our lodging at Tarangire National Park. The challenge, as always, was to slip out of the tourist bubble for a closer look at daily life as lived by regular people. I'm not sure how clear a picture I got of real African life, but there are several things that strike the Western tourist being driven from one national park to the next. The natural beauty of the countryside contrasts sharply with the poverty and squalor of both urban and rural sub-Saharan Africa. In big cities like Nairobi, millions are crammed into urban slums, as they are throughout Asia and Latin America. In the rural villages, there is less crowding, but the poverty is evident everywhere. Most people live in little shacks, many with cardboard walls and flimsy corrugated metal roofs. While Kenyans are doing far better than their neighbors in Ethiopia, South Sudan, Somalia, and Uganda, unemployment stands at 40%. Per capita income is still barely $100 a month. Poverty is visible everywhere. So is an abundance of small commercial enterprises lining the main streets and highways. Many Maasai men wear the traditional bright red robes, whether tending to their herds or walking through town. Women wearing equally colorful outfits are everywhere engaged in commerce or socializing with their neighbors. They can often be seen skillfully balancing baskets of food and other items on their heads. We crossed the border into Tanzania near the town of Namanga. Here we had to stand in line to get our visas stamped by both countries, all the while fending off Maasai women beseeching us to buy their handmade jewelry. Taking pictures in the border area was strictly forbidden, so I was not able to capture much of the experience, which seemed rather chaotic and surreal. We also switched vehicles and drivers. Our new Tanzanian guide for the next 4 safari days goes by the Western name of Freddy. After an hour of dealing with border formalities, we took off with Freddy toward the Tarangire National Park. Tanzania looks a lot like Kenya, although there was a visibly greater police presence along the roads. It generally also seemed somewhat cleaner. We made a lunch stop at the upscale and well-guarded Arusha Hotel. Arusha is a popular gateway for the safari circuit leading to Serengeti and Ngorongoro. Driving through Arusha, I missed being able to stroll through the city and having the chance to talk to some of its inhabitants. Some of the animals we saw for the first time in our afternoon game run included banded mongoose, the rock hyrax, the ground hornbill, the white-headed buffalo weaver, the crested francolin, and the agama lizard. Flat-topped acacia trees are a common sight in Kenya, but in Tanzania we also saw lots of baobab trees for the first time. These trees shed their leaves during the dry season and can hold up to 25,000 gallons of water in their trunk to survive drought conditions. Also remarkable are the many termite mounds, some of which can grow as tall as trees. These mounds contain an extensive system of tunnels that serve as the ventilation system for the round termite nest located underground. This male impala can't seem to figure out why the nearby wildebeest herd is on the move. Wildebeest are the ultimate herd animals. Whenever a leader starts running, others immediately follow, and within seconds there's a thundering stampede rushing across the plain for no apparent reason. Elephants, on the other hand, seem to lack all spontaneity. This female crossing the road stops to face us frontally. She makes 3 mildly threatening scrapes with her left rear foot before proceeding. Another mother stops to give us a scolding look and perhaps mutter an elephant curse. We spent the night in the Tarangire Sopa Lodge, a comfortable complex with great views. The day ended as most of the others had, with a beautiful sunset and a delicious dinner. Much of the day was spent driving to Serengeti National Park, one of the most famous wildlife sanctuaries in the world. Along the way, we encountered a stunning black-backed jackal who looked like a dog with very long legs. For the first time, we also saw a dead elephant. It appeared to have been killed fairly recently and was beginning to smell pretty bad. In Tanzania alone, over 20,000 elephants a year are killed by poachers for their prized ivory tusks. Not endangered anymore are these Cape buffalo, sporting a variety of birds on their backs. The common warthog is also not endangered. They are wild and omnivorous members of the pig family, with a diet of grasses, roots, berries, bark, fungi, insects, eggs, and carrion. During the dry season, they dig for bulbs and roots using both their snouts and feet. They often bend their front feet backwards and move around on their wrists, which have calloused pads to protect them. I guess we all do whatever we can to feed ourselves. During one of our stops, I enjoyed watching some craftsmen making wooden sculpture. Another stop was at Ngorongoro Crater, where we were looking forward to returning in a couple of days. One of the highlights of the day was a visit to Olduvai Gorge, the so-called cradle of mankind. We ate our boxed lunches overlooking one of the most important anthropological sites in the world. The gorge is some 30 miles long and is dominated by a huge stone monolith. In the 1930s, the British team of Lewis and Mary Leakey discovered some of the earliest prehistoric bones, which date back almost 2 million years. These excavations have been invaluable to advancing our understanding of human evolution. International teams of anthropologists are still conducting intensive research at the site. Scientists have traced the inhabitants of Olduvai Gorge from Homo habilis, one of the first early human species to master stone tool technology almost 2 million years ago, to the members of our own species, Homo sapiens, who lived here 17,000 years ago. At Olduvai, we saw one of the few small amphibians we came across on this trip. The Mwanza flat-headed agama has colors somewhat reminiscent of the comic book character Spider-Man. It has the ability to change colors depending on the situation, such as at night or to provide additional camouflage protection. We spent the next 2 nights in the splendid Serengeti Sopa Hotel, with great views and with frequent visits from black-faced vervet monkeys. The final days of our safari did not disappoint. We spent an entire day on game drives through the Serengeti National Park. This 5,000 square mile park is at the southern end of the Great Migration and is one of Africa's largest and best-known wildlife sanctuaries. It's a good thing that our visit to Serengeti is almost at the end of our 2-week safari, because after coming here, there is not much else one would wish to see. The park was established in the 1950s and became famous through the work of Bernhard Grzimek, the director of the Frankfurt Zoo in Germany. He and his son produced the book and the film Serengeti Shall Not Die, a milestone nature documentary that helped raise funds for the aerial survey to help preserve this unique and severely threatened wildlife habitat. In a highly controversial action, in 1959 the British colonial authorities evicted the Maasai people living in the Serengeti and moved them all to the Ngorongoro conservation area. The day had begun with the usual impalas running down the road. For the next few hours, we saw a plethora of bird species. We didn't encounter anywhere near all of the 500 bird species living in Serengeti, but we did see a remarkable number, including the red-billed hornbill, the Egyptian goose, the blue-eared glossy starling, the superb starling, the bare-faced go-away bird, the fiscal shrike, the yellow-billed stork, the three-banded plover, the blacksmith lapwing, the black-winged stilt, the white-crowned bush shrike, the lilac-breasted roller, the rufous sparrow, the cinnamon-crested bee-eater, and the lappet-faced vulture. The afternoon was dominated by large cats, starting off with this lovely lioness slinking through the high grass. Then suddenly, off in the distance, James spotted a beautiful leopard perched on a high tree branch. This was the very first leopard we encountered on our safari, and also the last one we were able to view with such clarity. Leopard sightings are becoming increasingly rare. Though not yet considered an endangered species, leopards are regarded as near threatened because of their steadily declining numbers due to habitat loss and being illegally hunted. The leopard we observed had recently killed a gazelle and had hung it nearby in the same tree where it was resting. The last cat sighting of the day were these three cubs, who were all by themselves while Mom was off hunting. We saw hundreds of elephants in the Serengeti, including these individuals who had been cooling off in the swamp. These hippos were also cooling off in the water. At the end of a full day of game drives, we were very glad to be back in our hotel room with its sweeping view of the hills beyond the Serengeti plain. Our final day of game drives was focused on the Ngorongoro Conservation Area, which proved to be a fitting finale. Here were all the animals we had seen during the past 2 weeks, about 20,000 of them, living together in a spectacular setting. The Ngorongoro is a volcanic crater that collapsed in on itself 25 million years ago, forming a caldera, a large bowl about 10 miles in diameter. There are truly awesome views from the rim of this super bowl, looking down to the caldera floor, some 2,000 feet below. As we descended on this extremely steep, unpaved and bumpy road, it was clear that it was going to be a very special day. In the center of the crater bed is a salt lake that attracts many animals. For the first time, we were able to spend a while observing a black rhinoceros cooling off at the edge of the lake. Rhinos have become endangered due to widespread poaching. Their highly valued horns are displayed as ornaments or ground up and used in traditional Asian medicine. An average-sized horn can sell for $250,000 on the black market in Vietnam. With several warthogs nearby, we watched one individual roll over on its back in the water and then emerge covered in mud.
Ikaya fakanema
Other animals that were enjoying the water included a large group of hyenas, passing the time with a refreshing swim and some horseplay in the heat of the day. Their carefree play looked like a bunch of kids having a great time together, unlike the solitary jackal that could be seen walking along the salt flat all by itself. A large number of the animals at Ngorogoro are wildebeest, who can often be seen racing toward nothing in particular. Maasai shepherds may bring their herds of domestic animals in to graze during the daytime, but they have to leave the crater floor every evening at dusk. This Cory bustard seemed to be playing a game of cat and mouse with a snake in its beak. It would repeatedly drop the little snake and then pick it up to vigorously shake it around some more. This elephant was up to its neck in a lake that it was sharing with a large group of hippos. During the day, they keep cool by staying in the water, only emerging at night to graze and sleep on land. Despite looking calm and even cute, they are considered to be highly aggressive and unpredictable, which is why they are among the most dangerous animals in Africa. Most of a hippo's life, including birth, mating, and fighting, takes place in the water. Male hippos are territorial in the water, presiding over groups of 5 to 30 females in their young. Their eyes, ears, and nostrils are high on the roof of their skulls, so hippos can spend hours with their bodies submerged underwater. Adults can be totally immersed for extended periods and typically resurface to breathe every 3 to 5 minutes. They can even sleep underwater and will automatically resurface to breathe without waking. Like other large mammals, hippos are threatened by habitat loss as well as by poaching for their meat and their ivory canines.
Where it's going to go? Between?
Let's hope it makes a left. So right left.
Our final day of game drives has shown us the greatest splendor and diversity of wildlife that can be found anywhere on Earth. As we watch this pair of elephants emerge from the swamp, we are aware not just that our safari is about to be over, but that the survival of these and other large mammals may soon be coming to an end as well. The return trip from Ngorongoro to Nairobi and from there by plane back home via Dubai took 2 full days. On the day-long drive back from Tanzania to Nairobi in Kenya, we had lots of time to reflect on all that we had experienced in the preceding 2 weeks, the amazing wildlife, the spectacular scenery, the wealth of information imparted to us by our safari guides, the good company of travel companions, the fine food and accommodations. All that stood in sharp contrast to that other reality outside the tourist bubble, the extreme poverty that was visible everywhere, the less visible dangers posed by domestic and foreign terrorists, the severe threat to endangered wildlife posed by well-armed and organized poachers, the rampant corruption from the top echelons of government down to local policemen. At the same time, Kenya and Tanzania are among the more successful and promising countries in Africa. Their governments are both relatively stable and their economies among the best on the continent, thanks in no small part to safari tourists like us. Their citizens come across as being smart, healthy, and energetic. Education and healthcare are steadily improving. As a language teacher, I was impressed by the fact that average East Africans are fluent in more languages than most Americans are. As in most countries, there are sharp clashes between the old and the new. This can perhaps most clearly be seen with the challenges facing the Maasai and other tribal groups. Their traditional pastoral and nomadic way of life, shepherding small herds of goats, cattle, and sheep, is unlikely to remain intact in a digital age with the pressures of a global economy. And yet, there is much to be learned from their colorful way of life that has proved to be both sustainable and adaptable for thousands of years. My safari was not only a great adventure, it also taught me quite a bit about how beautiful, dynamic, fragile, and complex life in Africa really is.